Dezember 17. 1945, Schönberg, Belgium. The frozen earth shook beneath Sergeant Curtis Adams of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion as he hastily penned what would become his final letter home to South Carolina. Words his family would never read. They think we cannot fight. They believe their lies about inferior soldiers. Today, we'll show them what black artillerymen are capable of. Through the gray winter fog, Adams had just witnessed the opening bombardment of Germany's final desperate gamble in the Ardennes. Artillery shells howled overhead. German panzers rumbled through the snow-covered forests as the Wehrmacht launched its last offensive in the west. The 333rd, positioned near the German frontier, stood directly in the path of three entire German armies. Nazi ideology had convinced many officers that black troops were subhuman, lacking the discipline, bravery, and skill for real combat. Yet, in the crucible of the Battle of the Bulge, this segregated African-American artillery battalion would lose half its men, while delivering such devastating fire that even German commanders began to question everything they had been taught about race and military ability. The unit's story began on August 5, 1942, at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma. There, the 333rd Field Artillery Regiment was activated as a segregated colored unit under the official U.S. Army classification. It consisted of 540 enlisted men and 30 officers, armed with the M1 155mm howitzer, each gun weighing 12,000 pounds and capable of hurling a 95-pound shell more than 14,000 yards. The battalion was organized into 5 batteries: Able, Baker, Charlie, Service, and Headquarters. Every firing battery had 4 howitzers, each operated by an 11-man crew whose work demanded intelligence, mathematical precision, and flawless timing. Lieutenant Colonel Harmon Kelsey, a white regular Army officer, commanded the battalion. Like nearly all segregated units of World War II, white officers led black enlisted soldiers, a reflection of America's own racial contradictions, a nation battling fascism abroad while practicing segregation at home. Yet the men of the 333rd would prove, beyond question, that courage and skill were not limited by color. Training at Camp Gruber extended through 1942 and deep into 1943. Located 18 miles outside Muskogee and 60 miles southeast of Tulsa, the camp's setting was no coincidence. The Deep South ensured a familiar system of segregation, Jim Crow laws, racial barriers, and the daily indignities black soldiers knew too well. Most came from southern states, already hardened by discrimination. They were about to fight tyranny overseas while living under it at home. Their training was demanding, technical, and relentless. They mastered gunnery mathematics, calculating distances, elevations, powder charges, and wind corrections with the precision of scientists. Each fire mission required instant computation of factors like air pressure, humidity, temperature, and wind drift. A single-degree error could send a shell hundreds of yards off target. A miscalculated adjustment could endanger friendly troops. The equations were unforgiving, but they learned to solve them under immense time pressure. They memorized firing tables, practiced with slide rules, and could produce accurate firing data within seconds. Their performance shattered every racist myth about intelligence or ability. Many of these men had attended underfunded, segregated schools, yet they mastered physics and ballistics as well as any white artillery unit in the Army. They learned to load the massive 95-pound shells, high explosive, smoke, or white phosphorus, with precision. The powder charge had to be correct, the breech sealed perfectly, and the elevation set to the mill. A single error could mean instant death for the entire crew. Every man knew his role: loader, powder man, breech operator, gunner. And each depended on the others to work in perfect rhythm. Load, aim, fire, repeat. Speed and accuracy were everything. A skilled crew could fire 3 rounds per minute, and the 333rd's gunners routinely achieved, and often exceeded, that rate. During training exercises, their howitzers thundered across the Oklahoma plains, their accuracy matching or surpassing that of white artillery battalions at the same base. They also trained in rapid displacement. At 12,000 pounds, each howitzer had to be hitched to a truck, moved, and redeployed within minutes. In real combat, survival depended on it. German counter-battery fire could target a position within minutes of detecting muzzle flashes. The 333rd practiced until the process became instinctive. They could relocate a 4-gun battery, travel 3 miles, and resume firing in less than 30 minutes. This demanded perfect coordination across dozens of men, multiple vehicles, and tons of equipment. Everyone was expected to know every job. So if one man fell, another could step in without hesitation. Communication was another lifeline. Artillery depended on forward observers embedded with infantry units to radio target coordinates back to the guns. The Fire Direction Center would compute solutions, the guns would fire, and the observer would adjust. Left 50, add 200. Fire for effect. Each engagement repeated this cycle dozens of times. Clear, rapid, and accurate communication was essential. The men mastered radio and field telephone operations, memorized code phrases, and learned to recognize voices through static and chaos. Yet Camp Gruber itself reflected the deep irony of America at war. The Army demanded excellence from these men while denying them equality. Segregated barracks, separate mess halls, restricted facilities. Black soldiers could not eat, sleep, or relax beside their white counterparts. Even off base, Jim Crow laws dictated where they could sit, eat, or stay. They were training to defend freedom while being denied it. Still, the men of the 333rd accepted the hypocrisy because they understood the larger mission. This was their chance to prove their worth on the battlefield, to demonstrate that black soldiers could fight, lead, and excel. They worked harder, trained longer, and pushed themselves further because they knew that one failure would be used to justify prejudice. They had to succeed, not just for themselves, but for every black American who would follow. By early 1943, the Army reorganized its artillery forces. The 333rd Regiment split. The 1st Battalion became the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion. The 2nd became the 969th Field Artillery Battalion, and regimental headquarters was reformed into the 333rd Field Artillery Group, commanding multiple battalions. Both the 333rd and 969th remained predominantly African-American units led mostly by white officers, serving as mobile artillery support assigned to different divisions as needed. In February 1944, the 333rd shipped out to England. On June 29th, they landed at Utah Beach in Normandy, and within hours, they were in combat. Their guns opened fire in support of the breakout from the beachhead. Positioned among the hedgerows of Normandy's bocage country, dense, tangled terrain that turned every field into a deadly trap, they delivered devastatingly accurate fire to protect advancing infantry. Forward observers, moving with the assault troops, relayed coordinates of German positions. The 333rd's howitzers answered with precision and fury. High explosive shells crashed into German positions, destroying bunkers and scattering defenders. The infantry advanced behind the artillery barrage, taking objectives that would have cost hundreds of casualties without fire support. Through July and August, they battled across Brittany. The fighting was continuous and brutal. German forces cut off by the Allied breakout from Normandy fought desperately to hold the Brittany ports. Every town became a battlefield. Every bridge was defended. Every crossroads was contested. The 333 fired thousands of rounds in support of the advancing infantry. At the Siege of Brest, their accurate fire demolished German fortifications that had withstood weeks of infantry assault. The German Shed converted the port city into a fortress. Concrete bunkers, 6 ft thick protected German positions. Interlocking fields of fire covered every approach. Minefields surrounded the perimeter. The defenders, garrison troops, and naval personnel numbered over 30,000 men. They had orders to hold to the last man. Thessaly could not be taken by infantry alone. It required artillery, massive amounts of artillery, firing continuously day and night. The 333 Howitzers provided the firepower that broke the defense. High explosive shells weighing 95 lbs smashed through reinforced concrete. Each shell contained 19 lb of TNT. When it detonated inside a bunker, the explosion was devastating. Walls cracked. Roofs collapsed. Defenders were killed by blast and concussion. Direct hits collapsed bunkers entirely, burying everyone inside. Near misses shook the structures, stunning the defenders and making accurate return fire impossible. The battalion fired in carefully coordinated shoots. Forward observers identified targets. Fire direction centers calculated firing solutions. All 4 guns of a battery fired simultaneously, sending 4 shells toward the same target. The shells landed within seconds of each other, multiplying the destructive effect. Then the guns fired again and again. The continuous bombardment gave the defenders no respite, no chance to recover, no opportunity to repair damage. The precision of the fire impressed even hardened infantry veterans. Officers who had fought through North Africa and Sicily said they had never seen better artillery support. The shells landed exactly where needed. Targets were destroyed efficiently without wasted ammunition. When infantry requested fire, the 333 responded within minutes. When infantry needed fire lifted because they were advancing, the guns stopped instantly. This level of coordination required skill, discipline, and constant communication. French civilians watched in amazement as Black American soldiers operated sophisticated artillery with deadly precision. Many had never seen African-Americans before. Some had absorbed racist propaganda from both Vichy France and Nazi Germany. They expected ignorance and incompetence. They witnessed the opposite. The artillery crews worked with mechanical efficiency. Each man knew his job. Each task was performed smoothly. The guns fired with rhythmic precision. Load, aim, fire, repeat. Hour after hour, day after day, forward observers called coordinates in perfect military procedure. The radio transmissions were clear and professional. Target location, type of target, requested ammunition type. The fire direction center acknowledged, calculated, and issued fire commands. The guns responded. Shells landed exactly where intended. Targets were destroyed with minimal wasted ammunition. This was not luck. This was professional soldiering of the highest order. The battalion's reputation grew with each engagement. Infantry commanders specifically requested the Rayo Injo 333 for fire support missions. When a difficult target needed to be destroyed, they asked for the 333. When a critical attack required artillery support, they asked for the 33. Word spread through the divisions they supported. The Black Artillery Battalion was good. Very good as any unit in the Army. Division artillery officers praised their accuracy and responsiveness in official reports. After action, reports documented their effectiveness in technical military language that left no doubt about quality. One report from the 2nd Infantry Division stated that the 333 Field Artillery Battalion provided fire support of the highest order with accuracy, speed, and professionalism that exceeded expectations. Another report noted that the battalion's forward observers demonstrated exceptional courage and skill, often operating far forward of friendly lines to direct fire onto German positions. These were not politically motivated assessments. These were combat evaluations written by professional officers who cared only about results. The 323 delivered results. Their fire was accurate. Their response was fast. Their coordination with infantry was seamless. They performed their mission with excellence. Combat records documented their effectiveness. The battalion once fired 1,500 rounds in a 24-hour period. maintaining such a sustained rate of fire that gun barrels glowed red-hot. They captured the French village of Saint-Jour through direct fire, an unusual accomplishment for artillery. Their forward observers called in fire missions with such accuracy that infantry commanders specifically requested the 333 for support. In October 1944, after months of continuous combat, the 333 received orders to a quiet sector. The Ardennes region along the Belgian-German border had seen minimal activity. The High Command considered it unsuitable for major offensive operations due to difficult terrain. The untested 106 Infantry Division would hold the line. The 333 Field Artillery Group, including the 333 and 969 battalions, would provide fire support. The battalion moved to positions around the small village of Schonberg near Saint-Vith, Belgium. Service battery positioned west of the A River. Batteries Ale, Baker, and Charlie deployed east of the river, 11 mi behind the front lines. The atmosphere was tranquil to a point almost approaching garrison conditions, as a later Army report would describe it. The men built comfortable positions. Log cabins and well-insulated tents replaced foxholes. A recreation center opened with a beer hall, bowling alley, and even a badminton court. The 383 prepared a musical theater performance for Christmas. Regular leave to Paris and Belgian cities became routine. After months of combat, the soldiers enjoyed relative peace. They did not know they stood at ground zero for Germany's last great offensive in the West. Master Sergeant Floyd Jones of the 333 remembered those final peaceful days in a post-war interview. "We had excellent morale. The men were rested, well-fed, properly equipped. Our guns were in perfect condition. We had ammunition stockpiled. Everything was ready. We just thought we would spend a quiet winter before the spring offensive." Then December 16th arrived and everything changed. 5:30 hours, December 16th, 1944. German artillery erupted across the entire Ardennes front. Shells screamed into American positions from hundreds of concealed guns. The bombardment lasted 90 minutes. Then came silence, more terrifying than the explosions. Through the winter fog emerged the shape of German armor, panzers and assault guns rolling forward in massive columns. 3 German armies, 28 divisions, 150,000 men launched Operation VA and Rhin. Adolf Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied armies, recapture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. The 106 Infantry Division, in position less than 2 weeks, found itself attacked by overwhelming force. 2 of its 3 regiments were quickly surrounded. The division held a front of 26 mi, when Army doctrine stated a single division could hold no more than 5 mm. The line shattered. German forces poured through gaps, racing west toward the road hub of Bastogne. The 333 Field Artillery Battalion received word of the breakthrough at 800 hours. Master Sergeant Jones recalled the moment. "We had just been sitting around awaiting orders when news came of the German breakthrough, so get ready for action." The peaceful sector had become the hinge of Germany's entire offensive. The battalion's forward observers in the village of Blauf began calling for fire support almost immediately. Battery Charlie, commanded by Captain William Mlaud, responded within minutes. The howitzers roared, sending 95-pound high-explosive shells arcing toward German positions. The fire was accurate and devastating. Germans who expected to take BLA by noon instead found themselves pinned down by precisely targeted artillery. Battery Charlie's guns fired continuously throughout the morning, helping to slow the German advance. But the situation deteriorated rapidly. The 106th Division's artillery commander, General McMahon, ordered the 33 and 969 battalions to begin withdrawing west. However, he desperately requested that several batteries remain in position to provide covering fire, assuring them the main lines would hold and they would be in no danger. He was catastrophically wrong. Batteries. Abel and Baker of the 333 received orders to displace west toward Bastogne. They began moving their howitzers, trucks, and equipment through snow-covered roads. Battery Charlie and Service Battery received different orders. Stay in position. Continue providing fire support. Cover the withdrawal of the 106th Division. The men of these batteries knew the danger. They stayed anyway. Throughout December 16th, Battery Charlie fired mission after mission. German infantry assaulted American positions. American forward observers called for fire. The 333's guns answered every call. The howitzers fired so many rounds that ammunition began running low. Still, they continued. As darkness fell, the situation became critical. German forces had broken through on both flanks. Battery Charlie and Service Battery were now behind enemy lines, still firing in support of isolated American units. By the morning of December 17th, Germans controlled Schonberg and the bridge across the Our River to St. Vith. Service Battery attempted to withdraw through the village. German armor and infantry ambushed them with overwhelming firepower. Many men died in the first minutes. Those who survived were captured. During the confusion of being herded to the rear, an American aircraft attacked the German column, causing more casualties among both captives and prisoners. Battery Charlie faced similar catastrophe. German forces overran their positions. Some artillerymen grabbed rifles and fought as infantry. Others tried to destroy their howitzers to prevent capture. The battery commander, Captain William M'Leod, fought alongside his men until killed in action. Technical Sergeant William Pritchett organized a defense that allowed some soldiers to escape. He died covering their withdrawal. Private First Class George Davis manned a machine gun until German fire cut him down. By the end of December 17th, the 333 Field Artillery Battalion had been shattered. 6 officers, including Lieutenant Colonel Kelsey, and 222 enlisted men were dead or captured. 9 howitzers, 34 trucks, and 12 weapons carriers were lost. The battalion suffered more casualties during the initial German assault than any other artillery unit in the 8th Corps. Of approximately 540 men, only 286 remained. The 333 had lost more than half its strength in 2 days of fighting, but 11 men from Battery Charlie and Service Battery escaped the German net. Technical 4th Grade Curtis Adams of South Carolina, Private First Class Major Bradley of Mississippi, Private First Class George Davis, Jr. of Alabama, Staff Sergeant Thomas Fort of Mississippi, Private First Class Robert Green of Georgia, Private First Class James Leatherwood of Mississippi, Private First Class Nathaniel Moss of Texas, Private First Class George Motton of Texas, Technical 4th Grade William Pritchett of Alabama, Private First Class James Stewart of West Virginia, and Private First Class Dew Turner of Arkansas. These 11 soldiers walked 10 miles through deep snow and record cold trying to reach American lines. At approximately 1500 hours on December 17th, exhausted and freezing, they approached the first house in the tiny hamlet of Wereth, Belgium. The home belonged to Matthias Langener, a Belgian farmer. Inside were Matthias, his wife Maria, their 12-year-old son Herman, and a family friend. The 11 soldiers knocked on the door. They were cold, hungry, and desperate. They carried only 2 rifles between them. The Langer family welcomed them inside. Maria prepared food. The soldiers ate, rested, and warmed themselves by the fire. Herman Langanger, the boy, would remember those soldiers seated at his family's kitchen table for the rest of his life. But this area of Belgium was complicated. It had been part of Germany until the Treaty of Versailles transferred it to Belgium after World War I. Many residents still identified as German. Some welcomed the Wehrmacht's return. A neighbor, someone who supported Germany, saw the American soldiers. That neighbor informed a German patrol. The patrol belonged to the 1st SS Panzer Division Liebend Adolf Hitler, the most fanatical Nazi formation in the German military. The SS patrol arrived at the Langer home. The 11 American soldiers had no choice but to surrender. They walked out peacefully, hands raised, obeying the laws of war. The Germans marched them down the road toward a large, snow-covered field. There, away from witnesses, the SS soldiers revealed the true face of Nazi ideology. They beat the prisoners with rifle butts and boots. They broke legs with kicks and blows. They cut off fingers. They stabbed men with bayonets in the eyes and head. They shot soldiers who tried to bandage their comrades' wounds. They tortured 11 helpless men because those men were black. Because Nazi racial theory classified them as subhuman. Because the Wehrmacht had been taught that African Americans were less than animals. When Allied forces recaptured the area 2 months later, they found the bodies frozen in the snow. The evidence of torture was undeniable. Broken bones, bayonet wounds, mutilations. The United States Army investigated. Investigators documented everything. They interviewed the Langanger family and other witnesses. They photographed the scene. They identified each victim. But remarkably, they did nothing more. Unlike the Malmi massacre of white American prisoners, which resulted in extensive war crimes prosecutions, the Wereth massacre led to no charges, no trials, no justice. The 11 men of the 33 Field Artillery Battalion were murdered, investigated, and then forgotten. While 11 men died at Wereth, the survivors of the 333 fought on. Batteries Abel and Baker had successfully withdrawn toward Bastogne. They arrived in the critical road hub just as German forces began encircling the city. The remnants of the 333 joined with the 969 Field Artillery Battalion, their sister unit which had remained intact. Together, these African-American artillerymen would help write one of the most famous defensive stands in American military history. Bastogne sat at the junction of 7 major roads through the Ardennes mountains. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled movement through the region. German commanders needed the city desperately. American commanders understood they must hold it at all costs. Major General Troy Middleton, 8th Corps commander, ordered the 101 Airborne Division to Bastogne. The paratroopers arrived by truck on December 18th and 19. They had no artillery. They had minimal supplies. They needed fire support urgently. The 333 and 969 provided it. The remnants of the 333, now reduced to approximately 140 men and 5 howitzers, integrated into the 969's command structure. They positioned their guns in a defensive arc around Bastogne. Forward observers moved forward with the infantry. Communication lines were established. Ammunition was stockpiled. The exhausted survivors of the initial German assault prepared to fight again. This time, they would have company. The paratroopers of the 101 Tank Destroyer battalions, engineer units, and a handful of tanks formed a composite defense force, but artillery would be the decisive weapon. On December 20th, German forces completed the encirclement of Bastogne. The garrison was surrounded, cut off from supply, and facing multiple German divisions. The defenders numbered approximately 18,000 men. The attackers numbered over 45,000. The Germans sent an ultimatum demanding surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101, sent back his famous one-word reply: "Nuts!" The battle for Bastogne had begun in earnest. The situation was desperate by any measure. Ammunition was rationed to 10 artillery rounds per gun per day. Medical supplies ran low. Food stocks diminished. The weather prevented air resupply. Fog and snow grounded Allied aircraft, giving the Germans freedom to attack without fear of airstrikes. The defenders were on their own. The men of the 333 and 969 understood their situation perfectly. They were black soldiers fighting for a nation that segregated them. They were facing Wehrmacht and SS formations indoctrinated with Nazi racial ideology that considered them subhuman. They knew that if they surrendered or were captured, they faced probable execution. December 21st, 23, German forces launched multiple assaults on Bastogne's perimeter. The attacks followed a pattern. German artillery would bombard American positions for 30 minutes to an hour. Then the bombardment would lift. Infantry and armor would attack, trying to break through while the defenders were still stunned from the shelling. The tactics were standard. Wehrmacht doctrine proven effective on battlefields from Poland to France to Russia. But Bastogne was different. The defenders had artillery. Good artillery, black artillery. Each attack began with artillery preparation followed by infantry and armor attacks. The defenders called for counter-battery fire. The 333 and 969 responded instantly. Their forward observers, positioned in the frozen trenches with the paratroopers, watched the German preparations through field glasses. They identified assembly areas where German troops gathered before attacks. They spotted artillery positions that revealed themselves through muzzle flashes. They called back coordinates. The fire direction centers working in cellars and basements in Bastogne received the coordinates. Officers and sergeants hunched over maps and firing tables, calculating solutions by candlelight. The mathematics had to be perfect. Onnerer could land shells on friendly positions. The calculations took 2 to 3 minutes. Then the firing commands went out to the gun positions. At the gun positions, crews waited in frozen pits. The temperature hovered around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow covered everything. Thiemen wore every piece of clothing they owned. But still, the cold penetrated. Their hands were numb. Their feet ached, exhaustion dulled their movements. Yet when the fire command arrived, they moved with practiced precision. Their forward observers directed fire with deadly accuracy. High explosive shell store through German formations. The shells weighed 95 Wereth and traveled at over 1,500 altitude. When they hit, the explosion was devastating. A direct hit on a truck vaporized the vehicle and everyone in it. A near miss flipped trucks over and shredded tires. A shell landing among infantry killed or wounded everyone within 30 yards. Time-delayed fuses allowed shells to penetrate buildings before exploding, clearing German positions. The fuse was set to delay detonation for a fraction of a second after impact. The shell would crash through a wall or roof, penetrate into the building, then explode. The confined space magnified the blast. Walls blew out. Roofs collapsed. No one inside survived. This technique was particularly effective against German troops sheltering in stone buildings in the villages around Bastogne. White phosphorus rounds created smoke screens and ignited vehicles. White phosphorus burned at over 5,000 degrees dF. It could not be extinguished with water. It stuck to skin and burned through flesh to bone. German soldiers hit with white phosphorus often died in agony. Even hardened infantry feared white phosphorus more than high explosive. The psychological effect was enormous. German troops learned to scatter and run when white phosphorus shells landed. This disrupted attacks and broke unit cohesion. The African-American artillery crews worked with mechanical precision despite exhaustion, cold, and dwindling supplies. They had been fighting almost without rest since December 20th. Sleep came in brief intervals between fire missions. Food was cold rations eaten while manning the guns. There was never enough ammunition. The rationing meant every shell had to count. They could not afford to waste rounds on unconfirmed targets or speculative fire. The physical demands were extraordinary. Each 95 lb shell had to be lifted from its storage position, carried to the gun, and loaded into the breech. After firing hundreds of rounds, the loaders' backs and shoulders screamed with pain. Their hands were torn and bleeding from handling the raw metal casings. Yet they continued, load, fire, hour after hour. The howitzers themselves suffered from the continuous firing. Gun barrels became fouled with powder residue after every few dozen shots. The crews had to swab out the barrels with wet rags between fire missions. The breech mechanisms grew stiff in the cold and had to be lubricated constantly. Recoil systems leaked hydraulic fluid and had to be topped off. The guns were breaking down from overuse, but there were no spare parts, no mechanics, no time for proper maintenance. The crews kept them firing through ingenuity and determination. The fighting became so close that the 155 and Theme howitzers engaged in direct fire. Artillery pieces designed to shoot at targets miles away were being aimed like rifles at German tanks and infantry just hundreds of yards distant. This was the ultimate test of crew discipline and courage. Artillerymen were trained to fight from protected positions far behind the front lines. Now they found themselves in direct combat, aiming their massive weapons at targets they could see with the naked eye. Direct fire with a howitzer was dangerous and difficult. Direct fire with a howitzer was dangerous and difficult. The gun had to be leveled horizontally, pointing at the target like a rifle. The crew had to expose themselves to aim the weapon. There were no optical sights designed for direct fire. The gunner had to look down the barrel and estimate the lay of the gun. The range was determined by eye, not by mathematical calculation. The powder charge had to be selected based on judgment, not firing tables. Everything that made artillery an exact science became rough approximation. German machine gun fire raped their positions. The crews could hear bullets cracking overhead, snapping past their heads, clanging off the gun shields. Mortar rounds exploded nearby, throwing up frozen earth and metal fragments. German snipers aimed at anyone who showed themselves. The crews had to work while under fire, moving quickly, staying low, praying they would not be hit. Still, the crews serviced their guns, loading, aiming, firing with steady hands and calm precision. When a German tank appeared through 100-wide Durdi, 20 away, the crew loaded high explosive with a super-quick fuse. The shell left the barrel with a tremendous roar. It covered the distance in less than a second. The impact was catastrophic. The shell punched through the tank's thin side armor and exploded inside. The tank brewed up instantly, flames shooting from every hatch. The crew never had a chance to escape. When German infantry attacked across open ground, the crews loaded shells with variable time fuses set to detonate in the air above the attackers. These airbursts rained shrapnel down on men who thought they were safe in foxholes and trenches. The killing radius of an airburst was enormous, 50 yards or more. A single well-placed airburst could wipe out an entire platoon. The German attacks broke apart under this fire, survivors running back to their own lines. One gun crew found themselves facing German infantry at less than 100 yards. The loader grabbed a shell, rammed it home, and stepped aside. The gunner traversed the gun left, following the running Germans. The assistant gunner closed the breach. The gunnery yanked the lanyard. The howitzer fired. The shell covered the distance almost instantly. The explosion threw German bodies through the air like rag dolls. The crew loaded again, fired again, kept firing until no Germans remained standing. This direct fire combat exemplified the 333's experience throughout the siege. They were artillerymen forced to fight as frontline infantry while still performing their primary mission of providing fire support. The crews alternated between firing their howitzers and defending their positions with rifles and machine guns. When German infantry tried to overrun the gun positions, the artillerymen fought them off with small arms fire, then returned to their howitzers to resume firing support missions. The mental and physical demands were extraordinary. Calculate firing solutions under pressure. Service the guns despite exhaustion. Defend the positions against direct attack. Do all of this while cold, hungry, and low on ammunition. The temperature never rose above freezing. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. Men urinated on their hands to warm them enough to work. They slept in shifts, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, never long enough to truly rest. They ate whatever food could be scred, often just crackers and cold beans. Coffee was made from melted snow and grounds that had already been used twice. The ammunition shortage became critical. Batteries were rationed to 10 rounds per gun per day. This meant each shot had to count. Forward observers became more selective, calling fire only on the most important targets. Battery commanders became more cautious, refusing to shoot at targets that could be engaged by infantry or tanks. Every shell was precious. Every shell was needed. They could not waste a single round. Yet, despite these impossible conditions, the crews never failed. They never broke. They maintained combat effectiveness under conditions that would have shattered lesser units. When infantry called for fire, the 333 and 969 answered. When tanks needed support, the artillery was there. When German attacks threatened to break through, artillery fire stopped them. The black artillerymen held their ground and did their job with a professionalism that earned respect from everyone who witnessed it. German after-action reports captured and translated after the war expressed shock at the quality of American artillery fire around Bastogne. These documents discovered in German military archives in the 1950s and 60s provided remarkable insight into Wehrmacht perceptions. The reports were written by professional officers trained in the Prussian military tradition. They were accustomed to precise observation and factual reporting. What they reported about American artillery contradicted everything Nazi ideology had taught them. One Wehrmacht regimental commander wrote in his diary discovered decades later in German archives, "The American artillery fire is devastating in its accuracy. Our attacks are broken up before they reach the main line. We cannot advance. We cannot identify the American batteries to suppress them. The fire is professional, disciplined, and unceasing. These cannot be the inferior Negro troops our propaganda described." This passage is remarkable for several reasons. First, it acknowledges American artillery superiority in unambiguous terms. Second, it explicitly mentions race, something rare in German military documents. Third, it directly contradicts Nazi propaganda. This was an officer trained to believe in Aryan supremacy, forced by combat experience to question that belief. The evidence of his own eyes and the casualties in his regiment made denial impossible. A divisional report from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division complained, "Artillery fire from the Bastogne perimeter is the heaviest and most accurate we have encountered. Our casualties from artillery exceed our casualties from all other causes combined. Every attack is met with immediate and precisely targeted fire. The American artillery is of the highest quality." This report is significant because it quantifies the impact. Artillery casualties exceeded all other causes combined. This meant more men were killed by artillery than by rifles, machine guns, mortars, and tanks together. The report also notes that the fire was immediate and precisely targeted. This indicated good forward observers, efficient fire direction centers, and skilled gun crews. The final sentence is unqualified praise. The American artillery is of the highest quality. No caveats, no excuses, just acknowledgement of superior performance. Another German report from a battalion commander in the 26th Volksgrenadier Division stated, "We attempted to attack at dawn. American artillery fire fell on our assembly area before we could advance. The fire was concentrated and accurate. We suffered 30% casualties before the attack began. The attack was cancelled. Our men are demoralized by the constant artillery fire. They say the Americans can see everything and hit anything." This report reveals the psychological impact of effective artillery. German soldiers became demoralized. They felt exposed and vulnerable. They believed the Americans could see everything and hit anything. This was not true, but it felt true to men enduring continuous bombardment. The fear of artillery became paralyzing. Men hesitated to move. They stayed in cover. They became reluctant to attack. This fear was more damaging than the physical casualties. Wehrmacht officers raised on Nazi ideology that taught black soldiers were subhuman and incapable of military excellence found their theories destroyed by reality. The 333 and 969 were not inferior. They were among the best artillery units on the battlefield. Their fire broke German attacks. Their accuracy destroyed German equipment. Their discipline never wavered even under the most desperate circumstances. The transformation of German perceptions was forced, not voluntary. These officers did not change their beliefs because they wanted to. They changed because reality gave them no choice. When propaganda meets truth in combat, propaganda loses. When racial theories encounter competent soldiers of the supposedly inferior race, the theories collapse. Some German officers never admitted this publicly. They maintained their racist beliefs despite the evidence. But others acknowledged the truth in private writings discovered after the war. They recognized that they had been taught lies. They understood that race had nothing to do with military competence. Combat forced this recognition. Men who could deliver accurate artillery fire under impossible conditions were not inferior by any rational standard. The irony was bitter. Nazi Germany, which claimed racial superiority as justification for conquest, found itself defeated partly by soldiers it classified as subhuman. The Wehrmacht, which prided itself on tactical excellence, was beaten by units it had been taught to despise. The contradiction was inescapable. Either the Nazi racial theories were wrong, or the evidence of combat was wrong. No rational person could deny the evidence of combat. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The weather cleared briefly. German aircraft bombed Bastogne, killing Captain Ray Chappell of Battery Baker 33. The garrison suffered heavy casualties. Then the clouds lifted further. Allied aircraft finally reached Bastogne. Transport planes dropped supplies. Fighter bombers attacked German positions. The siege continued, but hope arrived with those supply drops. The defenders knew relief was coming. They just had to hold a little longer. December 25th, Christmas Day. A strange quiet settled over the battlefield. Both sides paused, exhausted. The men of the 33-3 and 969 ate cold rations in frozen gun pits. They were far from home, fighting for a country that denied them equality, surrounded by enemies who wanted them dead because of their race. Yet they never broke. They never surrendered. They never surrendered. They never stopped fighting. Private First Class Samuel Ellis of the 969 wrote in a letter that reached his family months later, "Today is Christmas. We are surrounded. We have little food, little ammunition, and no way out. But we are not afraid. We will hold this ground. We will do our duty. Tell everyone back home that when it mattered most, the black artillerymen stood and fought. Let them remember that." December 26th, General George Patton's Third Army broke through the German encirclement from the south. The 4th Armored Division's tanks reached Bastogne's perimeter. The siege was lifted. The defenders had held. Bastogne remained in American hands. The German offensive had failed. Over the following weeks, American forces pushed the Wehrmacht toward Germany. The Battle of the Bulge was won for their actions at Bastogne. Both the 333 and 969 Field Artillery Battalions received recognition as part of the Presidential Unit Citation awarded to units attached to the 101 Airborne Division on March 13, 1945. This was the first Presidential Unit Citation, the U.S. Army's highest collective award, granted for actions that included African American combat formations during World War II. The honor acknowledged exceptional bravery in the face of an armed foe. The figures told a grim story. The 333rd Field Artillery Battalion entered the Battle of the Bulge with roughly 540 officers and enlisted men. By the battle's end, 6 officers, including the battalion commander, and 222 enlisted troops were killed, wounded, or captured. The casualty rate surpassed 42%. The unit endured more losses than any other artillery formation in the 8th Corps. Yet, despite these devastating setbacks, the survivors never faltered. They continued fighting with determination until relief arrived. They upheld discipline, precision, and combat effectiveness under conditions that would have shattered lesser formations. Their combat record demonstrated beyond doubt that African American soldiers equaled any in the U.S. Army. The 333rd's accuracy, professionalism, and valor matched or even surpassed white artillery units. Wehrmacht officers who survived the war and were later questioned by American historians consistently praised the excellence of U.S. artillery, making no racial distinctions. One former German artillery officer remarked in a 1952 interview, "The American artillery around Bastogne was superb. The forward observers were excellent. Their fire was accurate and devastating. The crews manned their weapons with speed and precision. They were highly trained, motivated, and extremely effective soldiers." After Bastogne, the remnants of the 333rd were reassigned to limited duties. The battalion faced plans for disbandment due to heavy casualties and the challenge of securing replacements for a segregated unit. For months, a skeletal force handled guard and labor duties. Finally, in April 1945, enough reinforcements arrived. The 333rd Field Artillery Battalion was reformed and returned to action for the war's final weeks in Europe. The 333rd Field Artillery Group, its headquarters component, served through the Rhineland and Central Europe campaigns until Germany's surrender. The unit was deactivated on December 30, 1945, at Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia. The battalion itself was formally dissolved on June 10, 1945, in Germany. The men returned home to a country still enforcing segregation, still bound by Jim Crow laws, still denying them the rights they had risked their lives to defend. The Wereth 11 received no justice. Their massacre was investigated but never prosecuted. While the Malmedy massacre led to extensive war crimes, trials, and convictions, the murder of 11 black soldiers went unpunished. A 1949 Senate Armed Services Committee report documented 12 incidents of Nazi forces killing captured American soldiers and Belgian civilians during the Battle of the Bulge. But the Wereth killings were not mentioned. For decades, their story remained buried. African-American veterans came home to the same prejudice they had known before the war. Their sacrifices faded from memory, overshadowed by the broader tale of American victory. But in 1994, half a century after the massacre, Herman Langer, the Belgian boy who had once seen 11 soldiers eat at his family's table, erected a small memorial at Wereth. Now an elderly man, Langer had never forgotten. The simple stone cross bore the names of the 11 murdered men. It stood quietly in the field where they had died, a personal act of remembrance in a hamlet scarcely marked on maps. In 2001, 3 Belgian citizens began a mission to create a permanent tribute to the Wereth 11 and all African-American soldiers who fought in World War II. They raised funds, bought land, and built a dignified monument. The memorial was dedicated in 2004, 60 years after the tragedy. Road signs were installed pointing to Wereth, and the Belgian Tourism Bureau included it in Battle of the Bulge guidebooks. The story finally reached a wider audience. In 2006, the Worcester, Massachusetts chapter of Veterans of the Battle of the Bulge dedicated the first American memorial to the Wereth 11 at the Winchendon Veterans Memorial Cemetery. A decade later, in 2016, another memorial was unveiled in Miller Park, Bloomington, Illinois, listing each soldier's name. On September 19, 2016, the U.S. Senate passed Resolution 5771, officially honoring the devoted service and ultimate sacrifice of the 11 African-American soldiers killed at Wereth. In 2017, Representatives David McKinley and Bobby Rush introduced House Concurrent Resolution 43, bringing formal recognition from Congress. Justice had finally come, 72 years late, but it had come. The men were at last remembered, their heroism acknowledged. The lineage of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion endured after the war. On November 27, 1946, it was reconstituted in the organized reserve as the 446th Field Artillery Battalion and activated on February 15, 1947, in Birmingham, Alabama. On July 1, 1959, the 333rd Field Artillery Group was revived as the 333rd Artillery Regiment, with the 446th and 969th Battalions under its command. On September 1, 1971, it was redesignated the 333rd Field Artillery Regiment. Elements of the 333rd later served in Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The regiment's coat of arms honors its World War II legacy. A Belgian lion holding the red and blue shield of Bastogne, symbolizing the distinguished unit citation. The white border represents the city's encirclement and the snow of the Ardennes. A swordbreaker, an ancient weapon with jagged teeth that trapped an enemy blade, symbolizes the destruction of enemy power. Its 5 barbs commemorate the regiment's participation in 5 European campaigns. The lessons learned at such terrible cost ultimately transformed the U.S. military. On July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the armed forces. It declared equality of treatment and opportunity for all service members regardless of race, color, religion, or national origin. The process took time, but the change was irreversible. The 333rd and other African American combat units had proved that segregation was not only immoral, but militarily irrational. Master Sergeant Floyd Jones, interviewed in 1983, spoke for many veterans. "We knew we were fighting two wars, the one against the Germans and the one against racism at home. We won the first in 1945. The second took longer, but we won that too. We proved that black soldiers were the equals of any in the world. Nobody could deny that after Bastogne. We held our ground. We fought when everyone doubted us. We proved ourselves when it mattered most." In 2020, even amid the pandemic, the U.S. Embassy in Belgium continued to hold ceremonies at the Wereth Memorial. Despite restrictions, diplomats and local leaders gathered each December to honor the 11 fallen men. Remembrance had become part of the enduring friendship between America and Belgium. Today, the Wereth Memorial still stands in that quiet Belgian field where 11 men were executed because Nazi ideology saw them as less than human. Visitors from around the world come to pay tribute. Their names are carved in stone: Curtis Adams, Major Bradley, George Davis Jr., Thomas Fort, Robert Greene, James Leatherwood, Nathaniel Moss, George Motten, William Pritchett, James Stewart, and Dew Turner. 11 men who sought refuge and found death instead. The 333rd Field Artillery Battalion entered the Battle of the Bulge on December 16, 1944, near Schoenberg, Belgium. Within 48 hours, the unit had lost half its strength. 11 men were massacred at Wereth. 6 officers and 222 enlisted men became casualties or captives. Yet the survivors regrouped, joined the defense of Bastogne, and delivered the artillery fire that shattered German assaults and secured the vital road junction. They fought with such skill and valor that they earned the Presidential Unit Citation. They proved, beyond all doubt, that African American soldiers were the equals of any in the world. Their story was forgotten for decades. Justice came late, but it came. The Wereth 11 were honored. The 333rd's record was remembered. Today, historians, museums, and memorials preserve their legacy. The story of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion is one of courage tested under unimaginable pressure and found unbreakable. It is the story of men who served a country that denied them equality, yet served with distinction and pride. And it is a story that must never be forgotten. For these men earned nothing less through their valor at Bastogne and their sacrifice at Wereth.